Welcome to another Flexi Tools sewing video. My name is Graham and I'm going to show you how to table mount your sewing machine today and install the crank. I use the standard tripod mounting and I put rubber booties, very cheap way to use what comes in the box. The sewing machine and this mounting unit are manufactured to fit together. Once you have found the place where you want to mount the sewing machine, you can use the reference holes properly aligned. When you finish that, you drill those holes out so that the holes are big enough to take the bolts that you are going to use. The bolt size I use is an 8mm or a 5/16 in imperial measurement. The front bolt is installed down and the rear bolt must be installed up, paying careful attention to the length that it protrudes up. You might actually need to use spacers, because if the rear bolt protrudes too high, it will impede the operation of the machine and not work properly. Once I've got the front bolt down, I'll put a washer up underneath and I will put a nut onto the bolt and I'll tighten it to an extent, and then I'll be able to put the rear bolt up, and then I'll be able to properly tighten all of the bolts, and they're extremely stable, very solid, and it's a very simple way to do the install, as you can see. Now that we have the sewing machine installed and raised at a suitable height off the table, we can install the crank, and the first thing to look for is the small tongue on the crank bolt, which fits into the crank itself. You'll see there's a small hole for it. Before you can actually install the crank, you need to roughly line up the levers which fit into the tracks which have been machined out of the face of the crank, and then aligning everything with the tongue going into its small hole and then the levers going into their tracks, you fit the crank on. Once I've done that, you can see that the crank will turn, but now we have to properly screw it down. So I use a locking washer, a split washer. This doesn't come with a machine, but I'll always use one, because if you don't use it, the nut tends to come off the crank, so that's a way to make sure that your crank is properly stable. You can now tighten the nut using a spanner, a wrench, or pliers, and you'll see the machine is now ready to sew. I personally don't use any type of further support forward of the mounting, as it obstructs materials such as sleeves. Thanks for watching.